Welcome to the Private Well Class monthly webinar. Today's topic, we are going to answer the question, is my water safe to drink? Common questions about private wells. My name is Sally Dolan and I will be your host today. I work here at the Illinois State Water Survey with the Private Well Class team, and our webinar today is part of our Private Well program. The Private Well Class is sponsored, funded, and supported by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and the US EPA. We're able to put on these webinars because of this support and funding. So about today's webinar, like I said, this is part of a national program being implemented through RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, to support private well owners. The webinar material follows the free on well owner course that's available through the privatewellclass.org. We are going to be recording this webinar today, and it will be available at our website, privatewellclass.org, or on our YouTube channel. At the end of the presentation, we will take time at the end to answer any questions that you have. So be sure and put any of those in the question or the chat, and we will get those answered at the end of today's webinar. We do offer continuing education credit for this webinar. So through NEHA, the National Environmental Health Association, we offer it, as well as the Illinois LEHP program. For NEHA, you can only get credit for each webinar one time per credentialing cycle. So for instance, if your credentialing cycle began on January 1st of this year, you wouldn't be able to take this particular webinar again until January 1st, 2028, to be able to get credit again through NEHA standards. We have recently changed how you request CEs. So when you registered, there was a place for you to request CEs. If you did that, we will send you a certificate of attendance. If you need the Illinois LEHP credit, you still need to email us at info@privatewellclass.org. For those of you who are getting NEHA credits, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, we do have the last 3 times that this webinar was given, so that can help you determine if you will be eligible for credit for today's webinar. One last thing about the CEs is you do have to watch the webinars live. We cannot give credit if you go to our YouTube page and watch one of our pre-recorded ones. Also take note that we no longer offer partial credit, so you do have to be on at least 90% of the webinar to get your CE credits. So if we run short and I end at 1 hour and 45 minutes, we'll still give you the 2 hours, but if we stay on longer answering questions, it's still limited to those 2 hours. So again, my name is Sally Dolan. I work at the Illinois State Water Survey as an environmental health specialist with the Private Well team. Also on is Steve Wilson, who is our program director. He's a groundwater hydrologist here at the survey, and he will be popping on at the end to help answer those questions. And then we have Katie Buckley. She's our outreach specialist. She's helping on the back end of things, so she'll be fielding your questions online, as well as be the contact when it comes to the continuing education credits. Now, I've mentioned the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, or RCAP. They are our partner on this program. So what RCAP is, it is divided up into 6 regional offices that are all nonprofits that cover all 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And so if you're not familiar with RCAP, I really recommend that you find your state, find your regional partner, and reach out to them, because they are a great resource for the different things that they have. One of the things that they offer is a well assessment. And so this is the well assessment tool. And so You can have a RCAP member, a TAP, it's a technical assistance provider, will come out and help you determine any vulnerabilities in your well system. And they'll be able to answer questions like, is your well cap properly sealed? Do you have any backflow devices? What kind of pipes are in your home? Anything like that. They do often offer a free water analysis whenever they do these assessments, and they've done over 4,000 across the country in the last 6 years or so. This really isn't something that a homeowner can do themselves. You do have to know a little bit more technical side of things whenever you're doing one of these well assessments. And that's why an environmental health professional or an RCAP member should be doing one of these assessments. If you are an EHP and you're interested in our private well assessment tool, it is available on our website, so you can find it there. And these assessments, they work like a sanitary survey, if you're familiar with those for public water supplies. And so it just goes through all the parts and pieces of the private well system. And then you can use that information to educate a well owner about their specific situation, their well, and help promote best practices so they know that they need their well properly sealed, that they don't have a damaged well cap, nothing's broken, no animals are nearby. All those best practices are what we're trying to teach a well owner whenever we go out and do one of these assessments. It also really encourages communication and it helps raise awareness that the well owner is the one who's responsible for taking care of their well. So like I said, there's been roughly 4,000 of these assessments done, and they've been done by different different states and health agencies have been requesting them, and this just helps them with their program. So RCAP with their team that's spread out all over the United States, if you're a health department with limited staff, you can reach out to them and develop a partnership to help them support you as well as your well owners. In addition to their well assessment tool, they also have an on-site wastewater treatment system assessment. And so what this would do is it identifies vulnerabilities in an on-site septic system. This assessment will ask things like, when was your system installed? What type of system do you have? Is it a conventional system? Is it an ATU? Those types of questions. And again, we encourage a professional from RCAP or a local health district to perform these assessments, since it does go into a lot of the technicalities of the septic system. I am here at the Illinois State Water Survey, and so it's a great piece of history that I have been able to become a part of. It began back in 1895 with outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. And so the scientists that formed the water survey in the early years, that's where they got their start, was in public health. Here at the Water Survey, we do house the state's well records. So if you're here in Illinois and you want your well record, we are the people that can provide that for you. And so we just do a lot of research here on groundwater and surface water, as well as atmospheric and climate research. And then, of course, we have our outreach for well owners and our communities around the state. One of the great things by having such a long history at the survey, some of the old time photos have actually been preserved. So we have glass plates that have been scanned. So we love to show them off because this is just such a great piece of history. So whenever you look at this picture here, you see this woman who's working in a lab, And so you can just see, you have wooden barrels up above, which when you think of today's laboratories, it's a stark difference between how they used to do things versus what we do now. We also have this picture here, if you notice, in the left-hand side towards the bottom behind the wooden water catcher. You'll see that there's a state water survey box there. So they were at this particular well doing some assessments and snapped a picture. You can also see in the grass just past the well pump, you'll see a little tin can there. And so people would walk by, they'd pick up the tin can, they'd pump themselves a cool glass of water, and then lay the tin in the grass for the next person to come along. So we've come a long way in society from those times. So this is another glass plate showing a drill rig from 1922 in Weldon, Illinois. Again, this is really neat to see what the drill sites used to look like and how the equipment has changed over the time. And you notice the gentleman's hats, definitely not OSHA approved now. So then if you fast forward to today's style, you'll see this is a more modern drill rig, courtesy of Kickapoo Drilling Company here in Illinois. And these gentlemen are OSHA approved with their hard hats. So it's just great to see, from 1895 to 2026, how things have changed, and using that past history to support what we do today it's a great place to work at. So moving on to today's webinar, a couple important points to remember is that private wells are not regulated. It is completely up to the owner and the user to make sure that the water is safe. We've heard so many people say, I've been drinking this water my whole life and I've never had it never had it tested. It tastes so great, it's great water. But the only way that you can know if your well water is safe is if you test it. Contaminants can be colorless, odorless, and tasteless, but they can still cause serious harm. So it's very important that you make sure you test your water. With a public water system, they take care of the water safety for you. So you pay your $60 to $80 a month for a community water supply, and that pays for them to have staff that is treating it, is testing it regularly, and then it also pays for the infrastructure to carry the water from the water plant to your home. But when it's a private well, that responsibility is entirely upon the owner of the well. And since they're not regulated like a public water supply, you have to take into account that it's your responsibility as a well owner to pay for that testing and treatment on your own. So it's all about getting to know your well. You want to learn how deep it goes, if it's a deep well, if it's a shallow well, is it in sand, is it in bedrock, or what kind of pump do you have? How deep is the well or the well pump set? And so, you want to be asking all these questions and learning all this, and that way you're aware of what your well is, because no two wells are set up the same. So just because your neighbor has it set up one way, yours may be completely different. So it's very important for you to know about your own well and be able to ask the right questions so local sources can help you and get you the information that you need. So testing is one of the most important things that a private well owner needs to be doing. And there are a lot of questions that come up when it comes to sampling or testing your well. Like, where do I collect the sample? What is it tested for? How often do I test? What labs are in my area? Do I need to test it from more than one place? And then when I get the results, what in the world do they mean? So these are all the questions that we get asked on a daily basis, and they're really important. So let's see if we can help get you some of those answers. So we'll start off with, where do I collect the sample? Well, the water coming from your kitchen sink could be completely different than what's coming from your tap. The water chemistry will be very different depending on if it's going through any kind of treatment, such as a water softener or a sediment filter. And then you also have to take your plumbing into consideration. So if your house was built before 1986, that's when all the Lead and Copper Act went into place. And so that's where we use that as the cutoff. 1986 is our cutoff on when you need to be more concerned about having lead in your well water compared to having a newer house. So you'll want to take these things into consideration when you're thinking about where you want to collect that tap water from. And then a good lab will provide you with instructions on their best practices. So oftentimes the lab will suggest taking 2 samples at least. So either from your kitchen tap is what we always recommend, because that's the water you're drinking the most and you're using to cook with. And then you can do the outside spigot, which is going to be before any kind of treatment. So it's coming directly from the well. So that way you're getting a representative of your well water and then also what you're actually drinking, because they could be very different depending on if anything is going on in the plumbing between where it enters the house and where it comes out the kitchen sink. So this is an example of a well analysis. The owner of this particular well was actually worked here at the Water Survey, so he was very well versed in groundwater, and so he kind of used his own well as kind of an experiment to see what would happen. So this is his well log, or not his well log, excuse me, his well analysis. So this is just the raw water, and you'll see that calcium is 85.2 milligrams per liter, magnesium is 33.6 milligrams per liter, and his sodium's at 25.9 milligrams per liter. So he has hard water. So whenever we skip to the next analysis, this is a water sample that's taken after it's gone through his water softener. And you'll see that the hardness has definitely been decreased when you look at those calcium and magnesium numbers. But the one thing you also have to know is look at the sodium. The sodium has now drastically increased. So that's one thing that you may not be aware of if you have a health condition that causes you to be on a low salt diet. Then you want to make sure that your water softener isn't kind of a source of salt that you weren't really considering. The other things that I want to note on this particular analysis is you'll also see that the copper is at 2.5 micrograms per liter, and the pH is 8.1. So then what we'll do is we'll skip ahead, and he also had reverse osmosis. So he took the well water, then he took it after his softener, and then he took it after the reverse osmosis. So we have 3 samples from 3 different spots in the same well system. And so what you'll notice is the reverse osmosis system really dropped that sodium level down. But it did raise the copper level up to 3.9. And if you notice, that reverse osmosis really lowered the pH. We went from 8.1 down to 6.23. So if you have anything in your system that contains lead, that can cause it to be aggressive water or corrosive and could lead to problems. So when you have reverse osmosis, keeping an eye on that pH is very important to do. So what do I test for? This is a question that We have a hotline that we get asked probably pretty much on a daily basis right now, because people are told get your well water tested, but then they don't know where to go from. So we'll take a moment here to talk about um, what you need to test for. So the first thing is it depends on where you're located, the depth of your well, what's the geology that it's coming from, and are there any known contaminants in your area? Um, so you can contact your county or state health department for advice. You can talk to whoever regulates water wells or whoever houses the well records for your state. Even talking to neighbors and finding out what they treat their well water for, or the driller that installed the well. All of those are great sources. We also have the Cooperative Extension, and they are a great resource for a private well owner. There's several cooperative extensions that have private well programs and can assist you with that. Now, we do always say that the main things that you should always test for. So every year you need to be testing for coliform bacteria and nitrate, because those two are what indicate that there's other things that can get into your well. So those are indicator species is what we call those. So we'll take a moment here and use some examples of how you can find information about what you need to be concerned about. So this is from the Rhode Island Department of Health. And what this is this is a map of the known arsenic and beryllium pockets within the state of Rhode Island. So if it's actually an interactive map, so you can zoom into where you live in Rhode Island, and you can see whether or not you appear in one of the green circles. So the small little circles, those are known spots with arsenic. Rhode Island had a lot of legacy orchards, and so the arsenic comes from previous pesticide use. So they kind of have this mapped out so you can look and see if arsenic is something that you need to be particularly worried about. And then you kind of have the blue blob that kind of covers the central part of Rhode Island with a couple little pockets up to the north. And what this is it's beryllium. And so beryllium is a naturally occurring element, and it just happens to be fairly high in Rhode Island. So they've created this map to inform well owners that they also need to be concerned with beryllium if they're in those areas. Another good resource is in Massachusetts. The Department of Environmental Protection has this great interactive map, and you can actually zoom in to an address and find out for that address what is the probability that you're going to have arsenic or uranium in your private well. And so you can go to your address, zoom in, and find out, and it gives you, whether or not they feel that you should be testing for arsenic and uranium or not. And so they have it mapped out what areas of the state these are most commonly found in. Another state who has an interactive online map is Wisconsin. This map was developed by the Wisconsin DNR to share water quality information from public samples. So it's an example of what a number of states are doing now, which is, having that mappable data where well owners can look at it and understand it. On this particular one, if you look on the left-hand side, it has all the different parameters that you can search the map for. So we did arsenic, and so it actually has by county, when they've collected these water samples, which ones have been testing higher than average for arsenic. So we have Winnebago County, which is in the red one, is the red county. And so you'll see from there that, They've taken over 1,000, almost 2,000 total samples, and over, let's see, 426 of them were over 10 parts per billion, which exceeds the health standard. So if you're going to be moving to Winnebago County, that's going to be something that you'll want to be sure to have the well water tested if you move into a house, and specifically arsenic would be something you would want to get tested for. We do have some suggestions on sampling. So like I said before, we do recommend that you annually test for coliform bacteria and nitrate. The Penn State Extension actually recommends every 14 months, and that's not a bad idea because then that way you're rotating through the different seasons. So if you're always testing in the summertime where things are dry, compared to in the springtime where maybe the well gets flooded, you're going to have different results potentially if surface water is infiltrating your well. And again, the coliform bacteria and nitrate are those indicators that let us know that there's a pathway for surface water to get into a well. Then in addition to the annual testing, you also want to initially get your well tested. So whenever it first gets installed, you'll do an initial test. And so you'll want to do a little more extensive test. So you'll want to include, the fluoride, iron, manganese, copper, zinc, arsenic. You want to cover a much broader sense. That way, you know what is in your well water, and then you can treat if necessary or keep an eye, and then just repeat that every 3 to 5 years to make sure that nothing new has changed in the groundwater and there's not a new contaminant that you didn't previously have. That's a great way that you can keep an eye on if there's been damage done to your well or if the aquifer has been contaminated. And that way you're making sure that you keep your well water safe. And then again, reach out to your local and state health departments and find out if there's anything known to be a problem in your area. This is just a screenshot from one of our articles on our help center. And so again, this is just a nice little, you know, what should I test for and how often? So it's a nice little snapshot of what you need to do. To be able to find this article, you can go to our website and search our help center. Just search for the word sampling and you'll be able to find this article. So in addition to what we just said, so annually, whenever you initially install the well, and then every 3 to 5 years, you also need to test your well if you've had to open it up for anything, for any reason, such as a repair. So if you've replaced your pump, we always recommend testing it to make sure that no bacteria were introduced whenever it got opened up. You also want to follow up with a sample to make sure that the water is safe to drink. So you want to test, and if it comes back positive for coliform bacteria, you'll want to disinfect the well, and then you want to test again to make sure that the water is safe to drink. You also want to test the well if you've had an emergency response to the area. So a hurricane with flooding or wildfires, any natural disaster like that has affected your well, you want to make sure that you get the water tested before you begin drinking it again. So where can you go to get your water analyzed? Every state accredits labs, and so we recommend that you always do a certified lab that has gone through rigorous processes to make sure that they're doing things to a certain standard to make sure that you're getting the best results. Some states have programs for private well sampling. So I know like Iowa, for instance, has the Grants to Counties program where they'll do free water sampling. You also want to make sure that the lab that you're working with gives you detailed instructions and are working with you to make sure that you get all of your questions answered, to make sure that you get a sample that is done in a way that you're not accidentally contaminating it yourself, and you know how to get it to the lab in the time frame they need to make sure that you get the best results. And never be afraid to ask questions. If you don't know the answer, don't feel that you shouldn't ask. Something tells me the lab has probably been asked the question you have many times, and they'll be able to give you an answer until you're satisfied with that answer. And then the lab should provide you with bottles and anything else that you need. So whenever you're reaching out to the lab, just make sure you ask them what their process is so they can help you get what you need. So if you don't know where to go in your state, you can find a lab. So we just did an internet search here for the EPA certified labs. And what this does is this takes you to their website. And so towards the middle of the page, you have the state certification programs. So if you click on that link, it will take you to this document here. And I only did a screenshot of part of the states, but it has all 50 states listed. And then it gives you the website of the program that certifies for your state. And so I just picked a state at random and landed on Indiana. And so whenever you click on this link, this map came up. So it's a searchable link or a searchable map of where you can find all of the labs in Indiana that are certified through the state. And so then you can find the lab that's closest to you. You can reach out to them and find out what they offer in the way of testing. I do recommend, if you have the option, to kind of shop around and talk to different labs. I know in some areas that's a little easier said than done, but if you do have the option, make sure that you're doing that. I will also take a moment at this point to also point out that you want to make sure that you are not buying a kit online. I'll get a lot of people that call in who are like, I went to Menards and picked up a water test kit off the shelf, and it says that I'm okay on lead, so do I need to worry? Well, those are very inaccurate, so make sure you're always going through a certified lab whenever you're doing this. I don't recommend ordering kits from like Amazon or anything like that. So make sure that you are going through a place that is certified to make sure that you are getting the best analysis, because this is your health and safety that you're looking at. You know, you're the one in charge of making sure your well water is safe. So make sure you're using a lab that will get you the best results. So give me a second here, take a drink. So then you've gotten your sample, you've sent it off to the lab, and now you get this report. And depending on what your background is, it may make perfect sense or it may just be a bunch of numbers. So how do you take those numbers and understand what it means? Well, you're going to have to do your due diligence. You can use websites or documents online to try and make sense of it. You can contact your local health department and ask them if they can help you understand it. You can always reach out to us and we'll be, more than happy to help you understand what your results are saying. And then if something is found in your well, we do always recommend that you resample to confirm, just to make sure that there wasn't some kind of error that did occur in the sampling process. If you have bacteria that's found, you want to have an E. coli test performed to make sure that the bacteria that is present. You want to know if that's E. coli or not. And then make sure, not just for bacteria, but you want to make sure that the water is safe to drink, is why you got it tested. So if something comes back high on your test, make sure that you take precautions and find another drinking source. Now, if it's bacterial, boiling, of course, will help you with that because it will kill the bacteria. But there's a lot of different minerals and stuff that you're only going to concentrate the amount that's in the water if you boil it. So you have to make sure of what the test comes back for on what steps you take next. So boiling for 2 minutes with bacteria, or finding a different drinking source if it's another contaminant. Now, the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services actually created a really great online tool. It's called the Be Well Informed Guide. And so what you can do is you can enter your well water test results into their database, and they will help you understand what's going on. So for instance, you enter in your results, say your arsenic's at 15, and then what you can do is you can pick the units. So that's really important whenever you get these analyses, is you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. So you want to make sure that the unit that you're using, that you match up, because you don't want it to be that you enter in for milligrams per liter when it's actually microns per liter. So you want to make sure that you are using the right unit whenever you do this. So what you would do is you would take your test results, you enter in these fields, making sure that you adjust the unit that you're using, and then it's going to give you a report. So, we put in arsenic at 15, and so it comes back that this value entered exceeds the drinking water standard. So it's important to know that private wells are not regulated. So there's no level of arsenic set for what your well water should or shouldn't have. So what we do is we take the figures that have been set for public water systems, because the government has taken the time to do the research to figure out those amounts for a public water supply, and you want to apply those numbers to your private well. That way, your well water is meeting the same standards that the public water supply would be if you were on a public water supply. So it's really important that you take that into consideration, and then you can see if the research is saying this level of arsenic in your well water could be hazardous to your health, so you want to take precautions. So this is just the results detailed out some more. So it's really great because it goes into do I meet drinking water standards? It goes into the health concerns. So it lists out the different problems that are associated with arsenic, such as cancer of the skin, bladder, lungs, kidneys, etc. And so it really gives you a good idea of, hey, I really don't want to be drinking arsenic in my well water. So what can I do for treatments? And then they even give you the treatment options on what would be possibilities to help you with your get your well water treated to a safe level. Other states love this tool, and so they got on board. And so we have the bewellinformed.info/workbench. And so there's been 12 states plus one county in North Carolina, Wake County, North Carolina, that all got together to participate in this program. And so they've created this workbench. So if you're from those states, you can use the drop-down menu, find your state, and go through the process of determining if what your well analysis is really telling you. So interpreting the results. So these tools are only a guide for typical water. You always want to make sure that you're talking with a professional if something comes back out of the guidelines. So you want to make sure that you're talking with someone at your health department to get a qualified answer, to make sure that you understand correctly. They are there to help. I know a lot of people are a little hesitant to get the government involved, especially since private wells are not regulated. But in typically, they cannot tell you to stop drinking your water or condemn your well. They can only recommend, hey, don't drink the water until X, Y, and Z are taken into consideration. I do know out east in Connecticut, Massachusetts, that area, there are a few local health districts who have actually put into their local regulations that they do now have the ability to condemn a well. So if you live in an area like that, that you're concerned that your well would be condemned, you are more than welcome to reach out to us, and we would be happy to help you with your situation and see what we can do to get you safe drinking water, but where you're not afraid that your well may be condemned without your approval. So again, that's only a handful of places across the United States that occurs. In general, the health department's there to help. They're not there to make your life harder. They're there to make it easier. So don't hesitate to reach out to them with questions. So you get your water tested. It comes back positive for coliform bacteria. What do you do next? Well, that's when you should disinfect your well. I've gotten calls on the hotline multiple times with, I want to disinfect my well. What steps do I take? And it's, well, why are you disinfecting it? Well, I don't want there to be bacteria in it. Well, have you tested it? Well, no. Well, the first step is you want to test it. You never want to open up your well and disinfect it if you don't have to, because you may very well introduce bacteria into the well if you open it up too often. So we recommend that you only disinfect when it's absolutely necessary, when you've tested positive for bacteria. The steps that we recommend for doing well disinfection comes from the Minnesota Department of Public Health. It's a very useful step-by-step guide on how to disinfect using chlorine. And so you'll see down here at the bottom, we have a little snippet from the page. And so this is what it looks like. So it's a very detailed explanation of what to do. So, it even gives how deep is your well. So if your well is 51 to 100 feet, you'll use that middle column. So depending on the diameter of your well in inches on the left-hand column, you'll use that to decide how much bleach that you want. One of the questions that was asked this month is, can I use dollar store bleach for shock chlorination? Well, what you want to make sure on is you want to make sure that you're at the 6% sodium hypochlorite or 5.7% available chlorine in that. So you want to make sure you check the label on that to make sure that it's a strong enough bleach to work for this. They also give procedures for disinfection if you have different treatment devices. So this is really important. So you want to bypass things like your water softener and filters to make sure that you're doing that according to these procedures. So once you shock your well, you'll want to then test again after you've gone through all of the procedures that are listed in this shock chlorination step by step. And so sometimes it'll come back as positive still. And you're like, but I shock chlorinated it. Why am I still getting these positive results? Well, there's a couple different reasons on why it might be occurring. The first one is a bacteria can live in what's a biofilm, so that slimy stuff that can grow on the inside of pipes. And so bacteria love to make that their home. And so depending on how thick your biofilm is, whenever you put in that chlorine, it may just be killing the very top layer of that biofilm. So you may have to chlorinate multiple times before it can kill off the bacteria in multiple layers of that biofilm before you get a negative coliform bacteria test come back. The second reason could be that your well may be being contaminated by a septic system. So if there's a leaking septic tank that's nearby that's causing the problem, until that septic tank gets replaced, you may need continuous disinfection on that particular well. So especially if you have a shallow well where you may be getting influences from surface water, you want to make sure that you have continuous disinfection on that. We always recommend that if you use spring water, since it's in contact with the surface, you'll want to make sure that you're doing continuous disinfection on that. The third is the water chemistry may be an issue. It may be causing the chlorine to be less effective, and so it's not able to work as a disinfectant. So it may not be killing the bacteria. And so we know that when you have a pH of above 8, chlorine isn't very effective at all. And so Virginia Tech has a group of researchers that have been working on using vinegar as a way to lower that pH to make the chlorine work better. But we haven't gotten any definite guidance on what well owners should do in that situation. And then there could be other things in the water that's reacting to the chlorine, so you may have to use a higher dose than what is typically recommended. If you can't smell the chlorine running through the tap whenever you're pulling the water through your lines, then you probably don't have any residual chlorine left in the system, so it's not going to kill any bacteria that's located in your pipes or your plumbing as it's coming into the house. Okay, so now we'll move on to correcting poor construction. So we just talked about, if bacteria is getting into your well, it may be because of a construction issue, whether it be that it's an old well that doesn't meet today's codes, then you may have to do something to bring that up to code. There are a lot of wells that were put in many years ago. I actually spoke with someone last week that the well that they used was from the 1800s. And so, of course, there was no well log. It was a hand dug well, and they didn't want a new well. They wanted to know what they could do to get the existing one up to code. And so we see these different older wells all throughout the nation still today. Many are dug down in a pit. So up in the northern regions where you want to get below the frost line, they'll put them down in pits. And so those are still used regularly. And then, like I said, hand dug wells from the 1800s are still used here in Illinois. So you want to make sure that you're looking at how the well was constructed to see if that's why surface contamination is getting into the well. And that's not the only problem. It's also a safety hazard. So we have two examples here of wells that um, the construction was not up to code, and it caused some serious issues. The one on the left-hand side is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. They used to have a blog that this came from, and so over the well there was just a piece of plywood that was laid over it, and unfortunately, it was an older woman that lived there. The plywood had deteriorated. She stepped on the well and she fell in and she actually passed away from it. So it just really brings forth that you want to make sure if you don't have a well that's up to code, you want to make sure that you do these things to make sure that tragedy doesn't happen. The picture on the right, that is actually a dead goat that's in the bottom of the well. This was located in southern Illinois, and they just had an open hole that was out in the field, and the neighbor's goat got out and fell in there. Well, if you're drinking the well water from this, you now have a decomposing goat in your well water that you're drinking. So you want to make sure that you get those wells properly capped and don't leave it open to the surface. I know the New York Department of Health, I've seen a couple of their presentations, and they love showing a picture where it's got a cup that's duct taped onto a stick. And the gentleman who owned the well call it the chipmunk dipper, because when a chipmunk falls in the well, they use that to scoop the chipmunk out. So you want to make sure that you have your well covered and properly sealed so you don't have problems like this. So what can you do with this? So you do want to bring them up to code. If you have a well that's in a pit, you want to make sure that you're extending that pipe up to land surface. We always recommend that you go at least a foot above land surface, if not higher if you're in an area that floods easily. And then you want to backfill with a clay grout to give that buffer between the surface and where the wellhead is. Um, Install a pitless adapter if needed. And we always recommend that you talk with either your local well authority or contractor beforehand, have them check it out, make sure that it is a well that can be brought up to code, and let them advise you on what steps to take next. On our help center, we do have how do I make my well safer? And so this is one of our videos from our YouTube channel. And so this is just a nice little video that walks you through the problems with having an older well that's not up to code and what you can do to make it safer. So I recommend that you check that out. Next, we'll talk about abandoned wells. So well logs weren't required until the 1960s, 1980s. I think New York State, it's something 1999, 2000 is when they started keeping records of their wells. So there are a ton of undocumented wells that no one knows about. Some of them are in well pits, and so there's the safety hazard there. And then whenever you have these wells that are open to the surface, they can easily get contaminated. People can throw stuff down in them. They can be flooded. Chemicals can end up in them. So it's just it's a public health concern to have an abandoned well that's not capped off and taken care of. If you have an abandoned well on your property, you should do what it takes to get it filled and make sure that you are being responsible for your property and not allowing someone to get hurt or allowing the aquifer to get contaminated. Some states do have laws that if you have an abandoned well and aquifer gets contaminated and it can be traced back to your property, you are then held responsible for that. So this isn't anything that's new or old. It's always kind of been a problem. Um, I saw online that there was in Nebraska in the 1800s, a man fell 100 feet into a well, and it was talking about how even back in the 1800s, um, people were just leaving their wells open. And now we know so much more that it's even more imperative that we're filling these wells in. In the middle, these are all older newspapers of different problems of people falling in wells. Some of you may be old enough to remember Jessica McClure. Um, she was an 18-month-old and she fell into a well, and it took 60 hours for them to get her out. In the bottom right-hand corner, I found that People did an interview on her in 2019, and she talked about how uh, the event changed her life for the rest of her life. And so I thought I would include that picture. And then a little more recently, on the top right-hand corner, back in September, there was a moose that fell into an abandoned well in Pembroke, Maine. And so Fish and Wildlife Services had to come out and, they had to risk their lives to uh, try and get this angry bull moose out of a well. And then on the left-hand side, it was actually also from September. No, I'm sorry, it was in July of 2025. Um, a gentleman went out hiking in the woods during the day, and when he got home that night, he realized he didn't have a cell phone. And so he um, used his wife's phone, pinged the location of his phone, and went back out into the woods at night trying to find his cell phone. Well, he ended up finding an abandoned well that was 50 foot deep, and he fell inside it. And luckily, his wife knew the location where his cell phone was, and so police were able to use that to track him down and found him and rescued him out of the well. But he did have to spend the night in the bottom of the well until law enforcement could rescue him. So it's stories like these that it's just not worth leaving your abandoned well open to have a potential catastrophe happen. So it's just a really good idea to, contact a well contractor, have them seal that off properly, and then you don't have to worry about being responsible for anything like that. Okay, before we move on, I'll take a quick sip here. So I've been talking a lot about the private well class, our hotline, our help center. So I want to take some time here to inform you about what we have to offer. So I'll start off with the private well class. So the class is completely different than these webinars. These webinars are just something that we provide on a monthly basis, but they're not the lessons. We actually have a series of 10 lessons. So you can sign up through our website, which is privatewellclass.org. And so you can sign up for that, and you are emailed once a week a lesson. And so it's completely self-paced. It's completely free. All of our services are free. And so once a week you get this lesson. And so then you can look at it and understand a little bit more about your well. We have a pre-test and a post-test to make sure that you become a better steward of your well by the end of these 10 lessons. We do have the webinars like we have today, and this is a way for us to give you a little bit more information than what's provided in the 10 lessons, so it's kind of a supplement. And then it also gives you a chance to ask questions. So later in the broadcast, we will go over pre-submitted questions, and then at the very end, be sure that you're putting in your questions in the question chat feature so we can answer those at the end of today's program. And then you can always email us or give us a call, and we are always willing to help a well owner with any kind of questions that you may have. So this is our website. So it's privatewellclass.org. And so you can go there, and this is what our landing page looks like. So you can see that we have, the help center there at the top, and then if you go down, you have where you can enroll in class. So to enroll in the class, you just click on that button, and it will take you to this screen where you can fill out. We just need your email, a first name, and where you live, and then oh, I'm sorry, that's the old website. So I did put in the new slide. I just forgot to erase the old slide. So you'll come to this slide now where you can enroll in the class. And so you'll click on that, and then that will take you where you can sign up for those 10 lessons that are offered free, and you'll get one a week for 10 weeks then. We also have all of our class resources listed on our website. So at the very top where it's for well users, if you come down to class resources, for each of our 10 lessons, we have all of the resources we use to create these lessons for you. And so if you want to dig in a little deeper, or you're really curious about aquifers, you have the information that we pulled from to be able to learn a little bit more about water wells that way. We also have a series of our webinars that are on our YouTube page. So all of our webinars are recorded. So for instance, this one, we have is our well water safe to drink? And then if you would scroll down on the page, it has all of the webinars that we've had and recorded, and we'll put those on our YouTube page. And what we recommend is that if you've missed a webinar, or even if you're just curious and want to learn more, we have at the end where you can listen to those questions, which are different every single month. So you can learn a lot by, maybe you want to listen to, about testing again. You can't remember all the details. You can come back to these webinars and listen to them and get information off of them that way. Just again, I'll repeat that you cannot get CEs for watching these recorded videos though. We also have some specialty webinars that we only hold every once in a while. So like we have the funding and financing options for well owners. So we have, it looks like the last one was recorded in 2023. And the reason that it hasn't been done since then is because we're still waiting on a new farm bill. So once the new farm bill comes out and the funding and financing changes for what the USDA can offer and funding and financing, then we will update and do a new funding webinar at that point. But this information is still relevant. This is what we're still going off of. So, that only gets done whenever we have new information to provide. And then we also have presentations like one on lead, where, this wasn't done long after Flint, Michigan, where they had their issues with lead in the water, and it was a very hot topic. And so we did this presentation, but the information on lead isn't changing. And so this is still very relevant. So if you're having problems with lead, this is the best information that we have available. If lead is of concern for you, we do have a page on our website dedicated to lead with all sorts of different resources. So feel free to go to privatewellclass.org/lead, and you can access all of these resources from that page. We also have a series of 21 videos that are available on our YouTube page. And so we have, for example, this one here is what should I know about a shared private well? And so we go over all the concerns you should have if you are using a shared private well with another homeowner. And so we have 21 of these videos that we recommend that you check out and look at. Our most popular one is how does my private well pressure tank work? And so this gives a well owner a great idea of how a pressure tank works and um, why it's necessary to have one. And so we just recommend that you check out all of our videos and see what you can learn from our YouTube page. We also have a podcast. Steve Wilson and Jennifer Wilson here, who are part of our team, host Tap Talk. And so they will interview people from across the nation on a variety of topics that all relate to drinking water in rural America. So these are from the 2025 series. These are the 4 that I thought would be most relevant to a well owner. So we really recommend that you check these out. So Terry Morris is with the National Groundwater Association. And so he went over Water Well Wish, which is a nonprofit that is trying to help people put in water wells through the using drillers and volunteers to be able to help people get a well installed. We also had the Florida Well Owner Network. They came and they talked about what the challenges that Florida is facing with climate change. And then we talked with Iowa's the Private Well Grants Program. So it's the Grants to County program, talking about how they offer free water testing across the state. And then last was Vanessa DeMuth from Dakota County, Minnesota, and what they're doing for research within their county to determine what contaminants their residents need to be concerned with. So next I will talk about the Private Well Hotline and Help Center. This is what I do on a daily basis. So if you call the hotline, there's a high chance you're going to reach me. And so what we did is we developed a help center to try and help get more information out to people who are well owners and for the professionals, so they had a place to go to get information, as well as having a better way to reach out to us for advice. So we have a variety of ways for us to be reached. And so again, from our front page on our website, you just click here on that Visit Help Center, and that takes you to our Help Center. So we have 3 different options for you whenever you go to the Help Center. You can search for articles. So earlier I mentioned that you could go to our Help Center, type in sampling, and that would bring up the sampling article. So you can search that way. You can also ask our chatbot. And what we like about the chatbot is that it is only pulling from sources that we have provided. It is not going and searching the internet and pulling from any and every resource it can find. We have put kind of parameters on the information that it can use. So it does a really good job on answering questions if you type that in. If you can't find an article that answers your question, the chatbot's not your thing, you can always give us a call. So you can reach us at 866-945-0699, And then you can also email us at help@privatewellclass.org. And so we are here Monday through Fridays, 8:30 to 4:30 Central Time. And so, you can reach out to us anytime, and we would be happy to help answer your questions or point you in the right direction. So again, here's an example of how you can use our search feature. So if you would type in the word flood and hit search, then these are all the articles that have something mentioned about flooding. And so if you want to know, is my well safe? Or if you've had a hurricane, you can then use this to kind of decide where you want to start with your search. So if you click on that first one, it actually ties you to one of the videos from our YouTube page. And so you can then watch the video through this page. And then we also have the disinfection details listed on this. So if your well's been flooded, you're trying to find out what to do to ensure that your well's safe, we've tried to include everything in this article to allow a well owner to get the directions for disinfection, have an easy to watch video where they can follow along, as well as at the bottom of the page, there's also resources that will give you more information about flooded wells. So then I have apparently talked way too fast today because I am almost over. So I want everyone to come up with some questions to ask me at the end here so we can fill in some more time. So I just want to take a moment to let you know about some of our upcoming events. We do have our monthly webinars, and so our next webinar will be March 4th from 1 to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. And our topic for next month will be outreach strategies for working with private well owners, and that will be presented by Steve Wilson. And then I also want to encourage all of you to check out the 2026 Private Well Conference. We're going to be hosting it at the Holiday Inn Missoula Downtown in Missoula, Montana on May 19th through the 21st. Registration is now open, so be sure to take a moment today to get registered. And then we are still accepting abstracts until February 25th at 5 p.m. Central Time. So if you have an idea for a presentation that you would like to present, be sure and submit an abstract. And you can find more details about our conference at privatewellclass.org/conference/. Okay, so today's lesson was all about being aware. With our programs, we want to make sure that you understand as much as you can about your well. We want you to be going out, finding your well log, finding out where's your water coming from, what kind of pump do you have? How deep is it? Is it a screened? Are you in sand and gravel or are you in a bedrock well? And looking at it from a very educated perspective, because the more you know, the better your questions are going to be. And that way, whenever something does happen, you're going to know ahead of time all this basic information so you don't get hit with it all at the same time. I spoke this week with a couple in Michigan who they were looking at buying a new house, and they were confused because the water sample came back and it was high in arsenic and tested positive for coliform bacteria. And they're like, we don't know anything about wells. Is this a problem? Do we need to be concerned? Should we still buy the house? And so, I had to take that time to educate them on the basics of things just to get up to where we could then talk about arsenic and bacterial contamination in their well. It's also important that you know what naturally occurring contaminants and water issues um, should be a concern for you. So depending where you're located, we talked about Rhode Island where they have high beryllium, but here in Illinois, we don't even think of beryllium as really something that we need to be concerned about testing for. So it's really important for you to know what you need to be looking at and what contaminants you need to be concerned with so you're testing for the right things. And then, like I said before, the more you know, the more you understand, the better your questions are going to be, and the better your local resources are going to be able to help you um, get to where you need to be, whether it's a question on treatment or a question on installing a well. The more educated you are, the better responses you're going to get because you're going to understand it. And then the last thing that I want to put here is make sure you're testing your well. We get so many people who are like, it's on my to-do list, but I'll get to it. I've been fine this long, or well, I live in the house that my grandparents lived on, and my grandparents didn't have a problem. My parents didn't have a problem. Why should I be concerned? Well, groundwater is ever changing, so you never know um, what might have changed. So again, the more you know, the better off you're going to be, and the safer you can keep yourself and your family. Now, the goals that we have here at our program is we want to make sure that well owners are given information and advice so they understand why their well is important, why they should understand how it works, and how to protect themselves from risk. So I hope from today's webinar that you were able to um, glean from this the importance of testing, how to find a lab to get the tests done at, and then what to do if you get the results back and you need help analyzing them. Do know that we are here to help, and so we are more than willing to answer any of your questions. Don't feel that any question is, the so-called there's no such thing as a stupid question. Give us a call because a lot of the calls that we take from our hotline, they end up, we start with one question, and then the the conversation evolves and we end up touching on so many different topics. And so we just want you to know that we're here to help and support you and make sure that you are protecting yourself with your well water. Okay, now is the time that we're going to get to the questions that have already been submitted. Keep in mind that Katie is still taking those questions through the chat in the question box. Steve Wilson and I will both be available to answer those questions at the end. So be sure that you submit your question now. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time typically. I talked too fast during the first part, so I probably could have put a couple more questions in here. But if you did submit a question before, I may not have typed out an answer for it. So if you still have that question that wasn't answered today and I don't get through it with the submitted questions, feel free to pop those into the chat. And so we will move on. So the first question, air and water. Why is there so much air in my water? Can it be hazardous? Well, the first thing that came to my mind is we've been in drought conditions pretty much across the United States. So people who haven't had problems with their wells are having problems because the water levels are so low. And so with air in your well water, it could be because of a mechanical issue like low water level, or you could have a leak in the pump's intake. So it could be a problem with the pump itself, or you can have a failing check valve. So while air itself isn't hazardous, the underlying cause is definitely a signal that there's a problem that needs attention. So if you have, the lower water levels, you may need to have your pump lowered so it's not sucking in air. So if it's not down in the water, um, it may be sucking in air instead of the water. So you may have to have a well contractor come and lower your pump. You can also have a damage to your well that you didn't know that's allowing air to get into the system. And so you may need a contractor to come and evaluate it and see if anything needs repaired. And then it could be that your well pump is failing. So if it's not able to get enough suction to pull in enough water, air may get into the line, which causes that sputtering or burst of air or milky looking water whenever you turn on the tap. The other thing is you do want to make sure that it's air and not a dissolved gas such as methane. So make sure that you are um, testing the water to verify that there's not something else going on, that it is actually just air. And then always remember that if you have a change in your taste, the color, or the smell of your well water, that you get that tested to see what's going on so you can resolve any issues sooner than later. Okay, next question is, how often do I change my whole home filter? It turns reddish within 1 month, but the drinking water is clear. Okay, so if it's turning reddish, that typically leans towards iron sediment in the well water or rust in your pipes. So that's typically what gives that red color. If it is iron, you need to be aware that there are two types of iron. And so you have the ferric, which is oxidized, which turns the water red, or ferrous, where it's dissolved in the water, so you get that clear water. So it's not really that uncommon for a filter to need changed monthly, especially if your levels are high. So the first thing that you would need to do is you need to know what that iron level is. It may just be too high for that particular system. You may need to upgrade systems, or you may just have to change out the filter more regularly. So you want to make sure you know those levels, because different treatment systems will be designed for iron at different levels. So you want to make sure that you talk with the treatment specialist once you know those iron levels to see if the home filter that you have is adequate for what is in your well water. If the iron levels are too high, or if you have both levels or both forms of iron, you may need a different system, such as an oxidation filtration system, to make sure that it's getting everything out. So again, the main takeaway from this is make sure that you do keep changing those filters, and then talk to a treatment specialist to find out if you need to upgrade to a different system, or if you just need to change out the filters monthly. Next question is also about filters. Are filters made different in other areas of the country as the groundwater is different in areas of the country? The answer to that is no. Your filters are made by a manufacturer and then shipped across the nation, even the world. And local stores and treatment dealers, you may think that your area only carries certain ones, but they probably just carry the most common ones. That doesn't mean that other people aren't using a variety of filters. Groundwater, can be very different, but it's not that different. The geology across the United States, you have pockets like I'll go back to Rhode Island with the beryllium. So, that is a special case, but overall, the geologies are pretty similar. So it's not necessarily that they're not, the filters aren't made differently. You just use a filter that's made for the contaminant that you're trying to treat for. Then I do also want to take a moment to let you know that you also need to be aware of counterfeit filters. Talking about filters being made differently, I watched a webinar where they went over counterfeit filters, and some of them are just filled with rocks, and they come from all over the world. And so they had done a study where they cut open these filters and found out that it was like coconut fibers or rocks or nutshells, and it wasn't anything that they said that it was. So really pay attention to what you're buying. If the price is too good to be true, it's probably counterfeit. So I know I live in town, but I still use a point of use filter at my kitchen tap. And I was looking for a replacement, thought, oh, I'll just go on Amazon. And there was one that was like $5, where it's like $30 at the store. And when I looked into it, it was not a certified, even though it looked very similar to the one from the company, it was not certified. So you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to make sure that you're buying a filter that is certified through a third party, such as NFS, WQA, or UL, because not every filter is made equally. So you want to make sure that you're picking a manufacturer that's doing their due diligence to get certified through a third party, so you know that your filter is doing what they claim that it will do. Our next question is, any tips on how to avoid technical language that may confuse people? And I love this question. The communicating and science have never gone hand in hand, and there's really a push right now to try to improve that. So this is a great question of how do you avoid losing people by having too technical of speech. So the first tip is you need to be asking yourself questions like, was this a vocabulary word I needed a definition for when I was learning it? Did someone have to explain this to me when, when you started your job? Did someone have to explain the concept to you? And then I had a professor who would make us repeat back to him and say, okay, explain this like you're explaining it to your grandma. And that's how he would get us to explain it. And he knew whether or not we grasped the concept of it. Could we give it in plain wording that even a grandma who had no idea what we were studying would be able to understand it? So I think if you ask yourself some of those questions, that will definitely help reduce that technical language, because you'll be able to identify, oh, wait, aquifer, that's a vocabulary word. So I'll need to either change out my words or explain the definition as I'm speaking so the person understands it. My second tip is to use examples or analogies. One of my favorite ones that I heard is someone said that an aquifer, think of it like a sponge, not as a river. Because there so many people think that an aquifer is literally water running, like a stream through a cave that's underneath us, but that's not what it is at all. You have this layer of sand and gravel that is just the water's going through the crevices and cracks in between the sand and gravel, and so it's soaking it up like a sponge. It's not a raging river that's running underneath our feet. And then the third tip is to use pictures and diagrams. use the example. It has nothing to do with well water, but I think it's great when it comes to communication. My neighbor across the street, she was from Jerusalem, and she spoke little to no English. And she was home by herself all day long with no one there, and she would get very lonely. And so she would come over if she saw me home and just want to talk. Well, she spoke Arabic, I spoke English, so that was a little difficult. But one day we were sitting on the back patio, and my kids had sidewalk chalk out. And so we sat on the concrete and used sidewalk chalk to draw out our conversation. And so we were able to communicate simply through pictures and diagrams and pointing. And I was actually able to help her with a home project because she drew it out. And so, a picture says 1,000 words. So using those 3 tips, I think you can really avoid confusing people and keep the language where it's not dumbed down, so to speak. You never want someone to feel that you're being condescending, but you can simplify it and use these techniques to get your point across where people understand. Our next question goes to arsenic. So I had high levels of arsenic and have a Culligan water treatment installed with reverse osmosis. I was wondering your thoughts on that system. We typically don't answer these questions, but I wanted to take this opportunity to really point out that while we don't provide the recommendations, you do want to make sure that a treatment system and a product are certified through a third party. So if you have this particular water system, you can go to any of these 3 websites and do a search and be able to find whether or not that treatment system is certified for treating for arsenic. And so you can do that step to see whether or not this treatment system is right for your well. Then it's also an opportunity to reiterate that you can test your water before and after treatment to see the difference of if the treatment system is really working. And that would be a great way to judge whether or not the system is working by doing a before and after test so you know what is going on. And then you want to make sure that you're following your manufacturer's directions for changing the filters. With RO, it is maintenance is key. So you want to make sure that you stay up on your maintenance to make sure that it's working properly. And then the other thing to think about is the type of arsenic that you have in your system is very important as well. You want to make sure that with, if you have arsenic 3, that is much harder to remove than arsenic 5. So you may have to have additional treatment to make sure that your RO system is adequately reducing the amount of arsenic in your water. And as you can see from the diagram here, the RO filter is the brown line. And so it shows that your arsenic 5 is too big, and so it can't go through that membrane, where your arsenic 3 is a smaller molecule and it's a neutral. It doesn't have a charge, so it's not bouncing off that membrane, so it can pass through easier. So in a case like that, you may have to add oxidation, such as chlorine, to reduce the amount of arsenic in your water. So it's really important for you to take all this into consideration, and then you can determine if that water treatment system is right for your home or not. Okay, sticking with reverse osmosis, can a reverse osmosis system be sufficient in filtering E. coli and or total coliform if the filters are the sufficient microns? So technically, yes, RO is effective at removing bacteria and viruses. Bacteria and viruses, other pathogens are usually 2+ microns, where an RO filter is at 0.0001 microns. So it can keep the pathogens from passing through. However, you still have live pathogens in your water stream. So if it's anything that produces, like a toxin, that could still be coming through. They could still be forming biofilms in your plumbing, which can cause issues with corrosion. So it's best if you use another method for treating bacteria, such as chlorine or UV. That way you're killing the pathogen and it's not just continually staying in your system and growing and potentially causing other problems other than just getting you sick. So while it technically is effective, you want to add another method to make sure you're killing the pathogens.
Hey, Sally.
Yes.
One comment on that. The other thing that happens is that membrane will clog much quicker, and it'll start growing bacteria on it, or it could. So yeah, RO is not meant for that. So.
Exactly. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so why would a well with coliform be considered safe as long as it doesn't have E. coli? Well, typically we don't say that a well is safe if it has coliform bacteria. Normally that's where we would recommend that you shock chlorinate your well, do an E. coli test, see if there's E. coli. So we typically just say that, if you have coliform bacteria, take precautions. Coliform bacteria is an indicator species. There are over 100 species of different coliform bacteria that can be found throughout the environment, and most of them don't cause illness. And I really love this diagram from the Alabama Extension because I think it does a great job of explaining why we test for coliform bacteria, but why we're concerned about E. coli. So you have hundreds of species of coliform bacteria, and within that bubble, you have E. coli, which is just one species with hundreds of strains. And some of those strains can cause serious illness. So we use those hundreds of species of coliform bacteria to let us know if those strains that can cause illness are located in your well. And so we use that indicator, and then you can do a more specific test to test for E. coli to make sure that your well isn't contaminated with that type of pathogen that could make you sick. So while coliform bacteria may not make you sick, we do use it as a way to screen for bacteria that could make you sick. So I would be very hesitant to say that a well is safe if coliform is present, because that does indicate that surface water is getting in, so other contaminants besides bacteria could also be entering the well. So I would still be very cautious if you have coliform bacteria, and have someone inspect your well to make sure that there's not something damaged or something needs brought up to code to prevent that. Okay, our next question is, what is a good method to locate a well if it is not above ground? So for various reasons, whether it's in the northern part of the United States where you have freezing and thawing, and so they put the wellhead underground. If it's been abandoned and someone's cut it off, people don't like stuff getting in the way of mowing, so maybe they cut the wellhead flush with the ground so they didn't have to deal with mowing around it. Who knows what the reason is, but sometimes you can't find the well, and so you know that there's a well on the property, but then you have to become the detective and find out where is it. So the first thing that you want to do is do a visual inspection. So you want to be looking around and seeing if there's anything that stands out to you. If you can, try and find the water main and find out where that line exits the house, and see if you can follow that line and figure out where the wellhead may be. You'll want to look for a depression in the ground. See if there's a low spot where maybe, you can tell that they've dug it up in the past. Be sure to look for any kind of well house. It may be in a small building that you might not be thinking to look in this little shed, but that may be where the well is located at. You can also try to find a well log for that particular well. If that's not available, there may be other property records. I know old deeds have a ton of information in them. So you may be able to find through other property records where the well was put. You can also try a metal detector. That may be able to help. And if you still can't find the well, then contact a well contractor. I found this particular picture online. I did buried wellhead, clicked on images, and this one came up, and it's like, found the wellhead. And so I clicked on it, and some of the comments are, I would have just brought the backhoe in and dug up the backyard until I found it. And sometimes that's what you have to do. They may have put a building over it or a sidewalk. Who knows where you may find it. So you just really have to, if you need to find it, you may have to go to extreme measures, such as bringing a backhoe in and just trying to start at the house, find where the line comes out, and just dig until you follow the pipe and find the well then. Unfortunately, there's not anything that's easier than that. So it just takes some detective work, and hopefully you're able to find the well eventually. And so on my picture here, I did put a little circle here so you can see where the wellhead is down underneath where they had to break the concrete away, is where they found their wellhead. Okay, our next question is, there appears to be a lot of manganese in the bottom of my tub after taking a bath. My toilets often turn black too. We have an FM water softener, but I'm wondering what else we need to filter the rest of it out. Also having some health-related concerns that align with too high magnesium. Can that happen with a well in Southwest Michigan? So the first thing that I want to point out is that a water softener probably isn't going to be effective enough if you have high manganese levels. It typically will only remove 1 to 2 parts per million of manganese in water. So you're probably going to need to talk with a treatment specialist. Again, I would recommend that you test your water, find out what your level is, and then you can use that to work with a treatment specialist to find a good treatment system that may be able to remove more of the manganese than what the water softener is. We typically, if you're asking specifically about a state, we typically try to keep it a little more broad. But since in this particular webinar, we talk about how do you find contaminants in your local area, I thought this was a good time to put this in. And so what I did is I just went to the internet and I typed in manganese Michigan. And so you can do the same thing. So if you have a specific contaminant that you're concerned with, you can enter that contaminant plus your state name and see what comes up. And first two things that came up when I did my search, both were from the Michigan Department of Environmental, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE. And so it goes into manganese in drinking water, and that it is found in Michigan ground and surface water, and that it is something that can be of concern. So I just recommend that if you have questions like these, a simple internet search can sometimes lead you to some really good sources. Just make sure that you're verifying your sources. So, I made sure that this was a department within the state, so it's a state agency, so it should be a reliable information. But if it was, Joe's water treatment, I might be a little less apt to click on that one. I would make sure that I start with state, federal, or other vetted resources before you look at things whenever you do a general internet search like that. Okay, so that is that for today's webinar. And so now we will switch over to answer your questions from today. Oops, trying to zoom in here and hit the wrong button. Okay, so is there any method of home testing, or do samplings always have to be sent to a lab? So technically there are methods where you can do your own home testing, but it is not recommended. We recommend that you go through a certified lab because they're going to be doing things to a certain standard. They have to follow the guidelines set by the EPA to make sure that they are following protocols and doing things in a particular way to make sure that you are getting the best results. And since as a well owner, you are responsible for the safety of your water, why would you want to take a shortcut and not do what is considered the best? I know it seems like a lot of money whenever you think about, spending $200 for a well test. But if you look at it as this is your family's safety, that's a small price to pay to make sure that your family is having good drinking water that's safe for them. Okay, so the next one, what if you don't know the specifics of your well, like depth, etc., to chlorinate your well? How do you know how much chlorine to use? So that's where you would want to speak with your local health department, possibly a well contractor, see if you can find that well log. If you can't find a well log, then a well contractor can open the well up, send a camera down, do measurements, and be able to give you that specifics, those specifics, if you need help with it. The other thing, you could do a best guess, find out what wells in the area typically go to. Again, I would work with your health department and see what the average well goes to and try and work with them and figure out how much chlorine that you could use. You don't want to just go and dump a bunch of bleach down there and, cause more issues by, making it too acidic and causing corrosion issues. So you would want to try and work with a well professional to get the best guess that you can for the size of your well, and then be able to chlorinate from there. So what is the difference between the Be Well Informed Guide and the Workbench? Does the Workbench incorporate state level regulation information? What can states not on the Workbench use? Steve, do you know?
Yeah, so the Be Well Informed Guide was developed by New Hampshire, right? And that was the only one. And so eventually enough states were interested in it that ECOS, the Environmental Council of the States, got involved with the US EPA, and they developed the workbench so that other states could also provide their state regulatory information, or not necessarily regulatory, but helpful information for homeowners with wells. And so all states have been invited to add to the workbench and create one for their own state. There's some states who are looking into that right now, and there's some that have already done it, and there's some that have not. And that's typically an issue of resources at the state level through their health department or whoever their private well agency might be. And so if you're not in there, if you're in a state that's not in there, you can use any of them. And I would probably use the Be Well Informed guide in New Hampshire, just because, you could, but it doesn't matter. They're also in that one. And so maybe a state close to you, a state that's similar to you, like, if Wisconsin has one and Michigan doesn't, then it'd be very similar in the type of responses you might get or kind of information available. But yeah, it still works. It's just the information you get may not be from your state. That doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. So, yeah.
Okay. For the next one, any financial help available to pay for analysis, and what are the costs for analysis? So the financial help is pretty limited, depending on where you live. Some states have programs where it is absolutely free. So I've mentioned Iowa before. They have a great program where they've give grants to the counties, and they're able to pay for people to get their water tested. There are a couple extension programs like Penn State and the Texas Well Owner Network, where they have a program where you go to a class, you watch the class, and then part of the class is you get your well water tested. I don't know if that's free or if it's at a reduced rate on all of those. But depending on where you live, there may be availability to get a free or reduced analysis. There are other states like in Illinois where we're at that you have to go through a certified lab. Our state health department no longer tests for, they no longer test private well water. Here at the Water Survey, our lab no longer tests private well water, so you have to go to a certified lab to be able to get a water analysis. And the cost depends on what you're getting analyzed. If you're doing just a basic well test, I know there's some out there that are roughly $200, and they cover quite a bit of the basic stuff. But if you want to get into anything like PFAS or pesticides, those can be very pricey very quickly. So it all depends on what you're wanting to test for, on what the final cost would be. And even like the programs that are available through the state, I know they only test for certain parameters. So if there's things that you want to get tested for outside of that, then you would have to pay for it out of pocket. If there's certain tests that you're needing, or you need help finding a place in your state, be sure and reach out to us, through either the Help Center or email us after the webinar, and we would be more than willing to help you try and find some place to get an analysis done for the best price. So the next one, air and water, as the water is fizzy and bubbly. All I have is the information from the previous questions, so I'm not sure exactly what their definition of air and water is. That's why I had the last point being to make sure that they check for dissolved gases as well. Okay, I noticed that on the earlier slide on sampling, I noticed that the picture of the faucet appeared to have an aerator. I just wanted to add or ask that when taking a water sample that the aerator should be removed. Also, it is recommended if using a hose bib or outside faucet that you clean those with a mixed solution of water and bleach, and then run for about 5 to 10 minutes before taking the samples. What are your thoughts on this? I'm a former health inspector, so whenever we did test at a kitchen sink, we did always make sure that we removed the aerator, and we did try and sanitize the faucet as best that we could. So that is definitely, if you're doing a bacterial test, you want to try and make sure that there's no contamination that's coming from any other source other than the water. And then for the outside faucet, the only issue I have with running it 5 to 10 minutes before taking the sample is, well, I guess you're doing outside, so that would get the well water up. I was thinking that if you're trying to do something like a stagnant water test, you wouldn't want to have that run, but most likely you're going to be doing that at the kitchen sink. You wouldn't necessarily be doing that at the well. So those are my thoughts. Steve, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, it's hard to ask a well owner to do all that and do it correctly. So that's not something we recommend for well owners to do. The more complicated you make that, and those aren't typically instructions from a lab as well. And the bottom line is, if somebody comes up, I get you're trying to figure out if it's in the water. So it's a complicated question, I guess. And I get that's what health departments do. I don't know if I always agree that that's the right thing to do. But yeah, what Sally said about the outside spigot, it really depends on where the outside spigot water is coming from. It could be coming directly from the well. It could be coming through the house and back out. We just ran into a case. We went to a house in Northern Illinois, and their outside spigot actually was treated. And so you need to understand where your water, what you're trying to sample. If you're trying to sample the well water, then yeah, you need to let it run until at least the pump's kicked on and you're sure that the water running through is the well water and not water that's been in a line. But yeah, I guess those are my thoughts on that. So
Okay.
Maybe not helpful, but.
And then for the last question, are health department's regulators only concerned with well analysis results after treatment, testing the kitchen tap drinking water after RO, chlorination, etc., or if there are elevated levels of contaminants that exceed regulated permissible levels at the water source before treatment? Is that still a concern to a health department? Well, it's all going to depend on why the health department is asking for the information. If they are trying to, look at contaminants in groundwater, then they're going to want you to take it before it goes through any treatment. If it is to make sure that it is safe for your consumption, then, probably taking it after treatment would be fine. If you're doing it for selling or buying a home, then I would check with the loan officer to find out what how the contract reads on whether it allows you to test after treatment or not. So you're going to have to work with the health department and find out exactly what they're looking for in order to be able to know which way they want that water tested.
So typically you're sampling at the kitchen tap because you care about people's health. So treatment matters, right? You may have treatment for arsenic on your system, and the idea is the treatment system working? Is the water you're drinking safe to drink? And so most of the time that's what a resident's interested in, as well as a health department would be interested in. Sometimes there are groups like maybe a county health department that's doing some work looking at natural groundwater quality, but that's not typical. It's more an agency like ours. And what we did until we weren't allowed to anymore is and like the example I think Sally showed earlier today, we asked folks to collect a sample of both. one from the kitchen tap, so it's their drinking water, and then one from an outside spigot, and let it run till you're sure the pump's on and everything else, so that you're getting a groundwater sample. Knowing the difference really matters. Our lab, I remember sending a sample to our lab, and they came back and said, "Hey, where'd this come from?" And I said, "Well, it's from a well that someone is having a problem with." And they're like, "This looks like rainwater." And so by the chemistry, they were able to determine that, yeah, there was a rainstorm the night before they sampled. Obviously, water is running directly in the well. Turned out it's an area with fractured bedrock, and there was connection to the surface. And so, it does matter. Sally mentioned for different reasons, but I would say in general, we can't ask a homeowner to collect two samples if they're paying for it. And before, 20 years ago, the water survey used to be able to do that for free for a homeowner, and we had them collect both. And it gives us so much additional information. So if there's a way to do that, you should, because natural groundwater can tell you a lot about what's in your finished water based on what treatment you may or may not have.
Okay. I think that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for the great questions at the end here. So it did extend and we didn't end way early today. So I appreciate all the great questions. If you do need those CEs or have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@privatewellclass.org. And we hope you have a great rest of your day and hope to see you on March 4th for our next webinar. Have a great day.